Welcome back to episode 3 of Texas Tech History. In the last episode, I did a road trip to Houston and showed the DeLorean Motor Company, I found the original Compaq factory, and took a visit to NASA. In this episode, I'll be taking a road trip to Austin and San Antonio to look at some tech history there. For those that don't know, I rent my Tesla out on Turo and it ended up being booked for the time I was planning to do this trip, so we decided to take my wife's Chevy Bolt. Now, we've never taken it on a road trip before, so this should add an interesting twist. This is an older model, so it has 238 miles of range, which is a little less than the current production model, but it's only about 200 miles to our destination, or just a bit over 3 hours drive. And for all those that are going to ask, my wife had the car wrapped with this purple pattern because she didn't like the silver color we got. Being this was summertime in Texas, we were facing a brutal daytime temperature of 105 degrees Fahrenheit. And for those of you on the metric system, that's over 40 degrees Celsius. So needless to say, the air conditioning will be working overtime. We decided to stop at the halfway point in Waco, Texas, and use the Electrify America station there. We could have probably made it all the way to our hotel in Austin without charging, but it might have been cutting it close. Besides, we needed to use the restroom, and we were only at the charger for like 10 minutes. It was dark by the time we made it to our hotel in Austin, and of course I always pick hotels that have charging stations. That's especially important since we plan to be here for 4 days to film everything. We decided to head out the next morning to San Antonio, which is an additional hour and a half from Austin. Unfortunately, at this point we got a nasty rock chip in our windshield, so that'll have to be replaced. That's like $500 down the toilet. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last thing to go wrong on this trip. The San Antonio metro area is home to some 2.5 million people. Now, there aren't a huge number of tech companies in the city, but the main company I wanted to show was a somewhat forgotten company called Datapoint. Now, don't feel bad if you haven't heard of them, but I think you'll be surprised at how influential they were. They produced one of the first, if not the first, glass teletype in 1969 called the 3300 ANSI computer terminal. They were actually called Computer Terminal Corporation during this time and would later change names to Datapoint. Up to this point, the main way to interact with a computer was by using a teletype, which used a keyboard and a printer built in, which were noisy, bulky, and expensive to operate since it required a constant supply of paper and ink. Datapoint was also the first company to build an all-in-one personal computer called the Datapoint 2200, which came out in 1970. You can also thank Datapoint for the first single-chip microprocessor. In 1972, Datapoint actually designed and commissioned Intel to build the 8008 CPU for use in their Datapoint 2200 computer. And to top it off, in 1976 they developed ArcNet, the first local area network for computer systems. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but needless to say, all of this stuff happened right here in San Antonio, Texas, and I wanted to find the buildings where all this magic happened. Although Datapoint is long gone, the buildings still remain, but what's more interesting to me are the street names. The factory itself is located at 9725 Datapoint Drive, so yes, this entire street was named after the company, and this street is a little over a mile long. Also next to the old Datapoint factory, you'll find Computer Drive, and one street over you'll find Console Drive. So these are like permanent artifacts here in the city left over from the days of Datapoint.
All right, so I'm currently standing in front of what was the old Datapoint factory here in San Antonio. Now, currently it belongs to Parkhurst New Vision and Laser Med Spa, whatever that is. But anyway, this is where all the old Datapoint terminals were manufactured back in the 70s. So now I looked at that picture that I showed earlier and I was trying to figure out exactly where that sign was. And I actually think it's over here at the end of the street. So let's go take a look at that. Okay, so I'm standing where I think that brick sign was, but it looks a little bit different today because there's all these trees and plants and you can't see the building in the background as well. Obviously the brick sign's been removed and it looks like they replaced it with this blank slate. But anyway, yeah, I think that's where it was.
If we drive just down the road to 8400 Datapoint Drive, you'll find two other buildings. Now, the first one here on the right was Datapoint Corporate Headquarters, and directly across the parking lot on the left was where Datapoint software development happened. In fact, I have a photo of this building back in the day, and you can see the fancy logo in the grass there, as well as the Datapoint Corporation on top of the building.
Okay, so I've made this trek on this stiflingly hot day. And yes, I'm wearing shorts and I'm not even apologizing for it because it is so hot out here. But this particular spot should be on the list of any nerd wanting to create a travel itinerary for nerd sightseeing. This is the birthplace of the microprocessor. I mean, a lot of people don't think about it, but this is where the idea came up with, and this is where they requested such a product to be made. Sure, Intel ended up making the processor in the end, but this is where the idea came from.
One little diversion. Believe it or not, just a few miles down the road from Datapoint is the current location of NewTek, the company famous for the video toaster product for the Amiga. They used to be based out of Topeka, Kansas, but are now based in San Antonio and are still in business.
Okay, and so here I am in front of NewTek. It's not just this building behind me, but it's also that building over there. Just a few miles away from where the Datapoint location was. Now, this is the company, of course, that invented the video toaster, but also really, in many ways, invented desktop video editing as we know it today, which I kind of owe my career to since I am a YouTuber now. Unfortunately, well, it is the same company that did all those things. Most of those pioneering things they did back when they were in Topeka, Kansas, so not a whole lot of that happened here in San Antonio. They didn't actually move to this facility until 1997, I believe.
Since I was already in San Antonio, I thought I'd head down to the Alamo. I wanted to say a few words about it, mostly because of its relevance in nerd lore to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where Chief O'Brien and Dr. Bashir have built a model of the Alamo and is talked about in several episodes. I figured some of my international viewers have probably seen this, but didn't realize that what remains of the Alamo was in downtown San Antonio. Unfortunately, when I arrived, I found it was entirely barricaded off. I thought maybe they were doing renovations, but later found out it was to protect against possible riots due to some of the issues that have been happening around the country lately, so this is a no-go. So that kind of wraps it up for San Antonio, so we headed back to Austin. The Austin metro area also has about 2.5 million people, and it is the capital city of Texas. I wind up traveling to Austin several times per year on average for various things, so I'm pretty familiar with the city. Austin is home to many tech companies, both past and present, including Dell, Electronic Arts, Apple, IBM, Origin Systems, and some other fun things I'm going to surprise you with, starting with this one. Okay, so we are on our way to visit another famous tech company, although I'm not entirely sure what this tech company actually did other than make a lot of TPS reports. But yeah, the name of the company is NewTek, and of course it was the company in the movie Office Space, and that was filmed just right down here, and we're going to go have a look at it. You'll find the NewTek building located at 4120 Friedrich Lane, and it actually doesn't look all that different despite being filmed in the 1990s.
And here I am at the entrance to NewTek. Obviously, it looks just a little bit different than it did 21 years ago when the movie was filmed. I mean, there used to be this, like, art piece logo, metallic logo thing right there. There also used to be this scaffolding up ahead, which all that fell down when the building burned down at the end of the movie. And of course, they just put that there just for that scene. Now, you may be wondering, well, didn't they burn the building down at the end of the movie? Well, not exactly. If you actually look really close at the video, one of the things you'll notice is, well, first of all, the building is entirely concrete on the top. And the poles here, these are all just concrete poles. And I think all they really did was set the hedge on fire. And if you look, of course, there isn't any hedge anymore, so obviously they burned that down. But other than that, yeah, I don't think the fire scene actually did any damage to this building.
If you turn around in the parking lot and look over there, you'll find a ditch, which is where another scene from the movie was filmed. Now, this was where they were walking back and forth to the restaurant that they had lunch at. I thought I'd explore the ditch myself.
Okay, so I actually think this is where they walked across this scene. So these hedges have certainly seen better days. I mean, in the Office Space movie, they were like this tall, but anyway, they're still here. But the thing is, the actual cut scenes that are before and after this little scene where they walk across the ditch here aren't anywhere around here. In fact, some of them I think were actually filmed in Dallas. So, but the continuity works. It all fits together. It looks like they're walking from one place to another. But yeah, there's nothing on either side of this ditch that would have been in the movie.
As far as real tech companies go, Dell has a huge presence in Austin. Now, one interesting fact is if you go back to the mid-1990s, Texas was home to AST, Compaq, and Dell, the three largest computer manufacturers of the time. So if you bought a computer in the 1990s, there's a good chance it was made in Texas. So Dell has at least two large campuses here in Round Rock, which is a suburb of Austin. Now, if you're curious how Round Rock got its name, which you probably aren't, but I'll tell you anyway, there's a large round rock protruding from the water in this creek, and yep, that's what the city was named after. Anyway, this is the North Campus for Dell, and something unfortunate happened here. As I was flying the drone, I suddenly got a warning message that the drone had lost GPS. Now that's bad because it won't hold its position and the wind started blowing it around, so I immediately started trying to bring the drone back down, and I would have just brought it down in the parking lot here, but Dell security had already run me out of the parking lot, so I was parked across the street. I almost had it landed, and another gust of wind blew it off course, and my instinct was to go up so that I would have time to reposition again for landing, which didn't work out because then it went right into a tree. And there it remains because I was unable to get it down. So this tree is my equivalent to Charlie Brown's kite-eating tree. So fortunately, I was able to download the footage from the drone remotely before the battery died. But I guess that's its new home until a thunderstorm blows it out of the tree. So far, I've lost a windshield and a drone. What else could go wrong with this trip? Anyway, back to Dell. Actually, before it was Dell, it was called PCs Limited. The name wasn't changed to Dell until around 1987, and believe it or not, Michael Dell started the company in his college dorm, so let's see if we can find it.
Okay, so we're standing on top of a parking garage right now, right across from Dobby Center. Now, the significance of that is Michael Dell was going to university right over there in 1983 and 84 studying pre-med because his parents wanted him to be a doctor. But he actually lived right here on the 27th floor, way up there of Dobby Center, and that's actually where he started his computer business. So yeah, this is the birthplace of Dell Computer.
Of course, PCs Limited eventually needed their own factory and offices, and it actually took weeks of research and asking around before I was able to find the address of this place. It's located at 1611 Headway Circle, building number 3. Now this is not in Round Rock, by the way, this is actually in the city of Austin. Now I wish I could show you some, drone footage of this place, but that's not going to happen.
Okay, so here I am in front of building 3. This is where PCs Limited was, where their first factory was. So essentially this was the first Dell factory.
One other little interesting tidbit, take a look at this tree here. And this was obviously a fairly small tree back in the 1980s. And well, take a look at it today. It's grown quite a bit there, hasn't it? There was another PC manufacturer that was located here in Austin. That, of course, is IBM. This entire group of buildings here is the IBM campus, and it's been here for quite a long time. And directly across the street from these buildings was this factory here. I think this photo was from the 1960s. And during this time, what they were producing were the IBM Selectric typewriters. Now, eventually the factory went on to build IBM's portable computers such as the IBM 5155, and I think also the later IBM PC convertible. Now, I believe they also produced the PowerPC chips here in the 1990s and early 2000s. Unfortunately, the building was torn down just a few years ago, and today you'll find a Nordstrom here instead.
Okay, so here we are. This is the facility where the IBM portable computers were manufactured, as well as those Selectric typewriters, but as you can see, it's gone. It's been replaced by this Nordstrom, so not a lot to see here. I guess it's sort of still sacred ground, but yeah. Anyway, let's move along.
Of course, thanks to Google Earth, we can go back in time a bit and look at it. So here's the IBM campus today, and the Nordstrom is to the left. Now, if we go back a few years ago, you'll find nothing but rubble there. And go back a bit further and you'll see the actual factory. It was actually pretty darn big. There's also a really large Apple campus here in Austin. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's relatively new. Now, Apple had planned to buy a large area of land in Austin decades ago, but then backed out. Instead, that property ended up being bought by Electronic Arts, and they built a large campus there. Now, I wish I had drone footage of it, but you know the story. Of course, Electronic Arts bought out another software company that was also here in Austin, which was called Origin Systems. Now, they were known for such games as the Ultima series, which I grew up playing, also Wing Commander, which I wasted a lot of my teenage years playing as well, and Times of Lore, and many other games. Origin has had several different facilities here in Austin, starting with this one at 110 Wild Basin Road. Now, at first they were only in one of these buildings, but later expanded into both. But they eventually ran out of room there, so they moved over to 5918 West Courtyard Drive. And so between these two sites, that's where most of the famous Origin games were created. Origin, of course, was started by Richard Garriott, sometimes referred to as Lord British himself, and after he sold Origin to Electronic Arts, he went on to do some interesting things in his retirement, including paying the Russians to launch him to the International Space Station. However, rather than show you a bunch of boring buildings, instead let's take a little adventure. There are two places set up by Richard Garriott that I want to show you. One of them is open to the public and the other is not. In order to get to these, we have to drive out to the west side of Austin, which surprisingly isn't all that far from the city, but it sure looks like it judging by the landscape out here. Eventually, we come to the end of the road as there's just these gates. I met up with two former Origin employees who were going to show me around.
So this is Scott Jones, a former art director, former lead concept artist for various Ultima games, including Ultima 9, Ultima Third Dawn, Ultima Online.
Ultima Third Dawn and Ultima Online.
Indeed. But yeah, Scott Jones is the actual former Origin employee. My name is Edward Vitralis. I am a Portalarium former employee, so I was never quite part of the original Origin crew, but I did get to work with some of those fantastic folks.
Edward gave me some neat Ultima swag, which I'll show you a little bit later. Then we followed the guys through the security gate and headed towards Castleton. So it's just a short drive through a bit of wilderness, and then it opens up into a small medieval village. Although, the first thing I noticed was this Globe Theater.
So this is the Glorious Curtain Theater. It was a project created by Richard for his fellow friends in the Society for Creative Anachronism, known as the SCA. The SCA and the folks in it and his friends and the people who worked at Origin were part of the same big giant community. He created many of his characters for his games from his friends in the SCA, most of whom, and many of whom I should say, still live in Austin to this very day. And their desire for not just role-playing, but also acting and theater gave birth to this place, which is a reproduction of the Globe Theater. There's only like 4 of them, I think, in the United States, and this is one of 2 in Texas, I think, if that's correct. I don't know the exact details, but for the purposes of Texas, so that we don't like swelter and die, this whole area is open air compared to what the Globe would have once looked like. It is a theater in the round, although in this case it's half round. And it leads into this wonderful spot, and typical to Globe Theater reproductions, it has both a heaven and a hell down here. And even in his most recent games, he's been trying to cater to the idea of a theater crowd and to create theater-like performance areas. In here is the backstage, and you can see little kind of posters and little objects that are placed up to honor all the different productions that have been done here. The Bairnsmen, who is the acting group for this theater, is composed of both SCA folk and former Origin employees, all of whom I've worked with at some point, including designers and programmers for Ultima 9 and Ultima Online.
And this is where the 4th mishap happened on this trip. It was so hot, my sweat started to carry the sunscreen I was wearing into my eyes, and I became almost debilitated for about an hour. This was my wife trying to flush some of it out with some eye drops, so that was fun. Anyway, moving along, just right near the Globe Theater is a little village which has strong connections to the Ultima series of games. I believe there are close to 20 little buildings, each one with its own story, and we'll start by opening up the tavern.
Wow, you're gonna have to come out and help.
So this is Castleton. We are at the Theater of Castleton. What is it? The Silver and Copper Tavern, I believe?
Yes.
Which, when people run events like myself, we tend to co-opt the name for something else. But this is Richard's medieval village that each little building kind of has its own story, is usually associated with some real-life person that one of the Ultima characters was named after. This space is used by the Boy Scouts, the SCA, the folks for the Lists on the Lake. I've run 2 live-action role-play events that were Ultima themed here. Richard's birthday parties are here. But yeah, so here at we've got over that way. There's the fort, the pirate ship that once upon a time had working air cannons on the pirate ship and catapults at the fort for pitched battles for various role-play and reenactment groups.
Yep.
And for you Ultima fans out there, each one of these cabins usually belongs to some real-world equivalent to one of the Ultima characters. For example, this lighthouse over here, it belongs to Captain Elad, which is Dale backwards, the groundskeeper here at Castleton. And his wife, for those of you that know Ultima really well, is the real-world equivalent to Katrina, the companion of humility. So everything here, basically everything in Ultima comes from something. And for you Ultima fans, this place is nothing but meaning to be found in everything.
Absolutely.
Just a few minutes walk from the village, you'll find Richard's boathouse. There's a dock here with a few little boats in it. I love the serpent boat, looks like something right out of Ultima. Then you'll find one of his cars parked here, this Audi with a license plate Soyuz, no doubt a reference to his trip to space. And right next to that is a nice little cabin, which apparently Richard stays at sometimes on weekends. And then there's a geodesic dome nearby that houses a swimming pool. Pretty neat. And believe it or not, there's even a chicken coop with 3 chickens in it. And so here I am, holding and talking to one of Richard's chickens.
I love chickens. I haven't held a chicken in like 20 years. Oh. But I love them. Okay, you don't like me, do you? All right.
So now we're going to go back to the dead-end street, and we're going to go check out the Necropolis, which is a geocaching treasure hunt type of thing, and it is open to the public. Now, the idea is you're supposed to print out this clue sheet and drive around Austin filling in the clues so that you can find the Necropolis. However, I don't have time to do this while I'm here, so the guys just showed me right where it is.
This is Necropolis, and for those of you who come to see Necropolis, you might be wondering where you're supposed to go. Well, the geocache actually starts on the other side of Austin, and if you follow the entire geocache, you get clues all around town, which eventually lead you to here. And this corner right here, you don't go through that gate, you don't go through that gate, but this corner right here is actually the entrance to Necropolis. And as you'll see, there is a chain link fence up here, among other kinds of fences. And once upon a time, Necropolis was about twice, maybe 3 times as wide as it is now. And there was a whole very wide winding path that you could go on.
It took about 10 or 15 minutes to make our way down the path, which mostly ran up against this fence. Apparently some of the property had been sold off and is now fenced off, so from what I'm told, it used to be easier to traverse.
By the way, fun factoid, most people mistake that for Richard Garriott's mansion. Richard Garriott's mansion has long since been torn down. That's a Dell billionaire who never did finish his property. But everyone assumes, because it has that observatory up top, because so did Richard's property, everyone assumes that is actually Richard's castle, but it's not.
Okay, so now we're approaching the actual, part of the geocache at this point. Not the part that was, maybe some of this was brought by fans, but originally there were solar-powered lights above that would shine down on you at night. But the whole path up to here used to be full of all this wonderful spookiness like this. So at one point, these have been, looks like, vandalized possibly. At one point in time, these were relatively intact, and one of the things that Richard liked to point out was that there was actually a child's coffin back there at some point. But yeah, I don't know if this has been vandalized or if it's just weather at this point.
It could be weather. We've had bad storms, and it doesn't take much.
It takes some time to walk through the trails, and there's a lot of sights to see along the way. Granted, this would probably be more appropriate around Halloween. Not only would the theme match, but the weather would be a lot more inviting in October than in the middle of summer here in Texas. But yeah, if you're looking for a nerdy outdoor adventure in Texas, it's probably worth trying to find the Necropolis. Of course, we haven't made it the best part yet.
And you can look down into this. If you wish to view the corpse, he is inside.
Oh, okay.
But this is the end of the geocache. This is the Necropolis Tower and/or Overlook.
So at this point, if you've found all the necessary clues, you'll have the combination to the door. You'll find a whole bunch of spooky treasures. In fact, there's even one of those machines you can put a coin in that'll make you a souvenir. Also inside is a medallion, which Richard actually carried with him to space. And you can even climb the ladder to the top of the tower. There's a pretty nice view from up there. And that about wraps it up for the Necropolis. However, one more cool thing about Round Rock, Texas is Bo Zimmerman's house. He has one of the largest, if not the largest, collection of Commodore stuff in the world. And I'm not sure if there is a Commodore machine that existed that he doesn't have in his collection. It's really quite impressive. I've been there a few times, but wasn't able to stop by this last time due to scheduling issues. But he does entertain guests, so if you're going to be in the area, you might want to contact Bo and get a personal tour. He also hosts the Central Texas Commodore Users Group meetings here as well. I had also promised to show you what Edward had given me out near the Necropolis, so here it is. So first of all, a little joke for Ultima fans, and an onk. Now, funny thing, when I first pulled this out, I didn't immediately think of Ultima, instead I thought of Logan's Run. Here's a sticker for Hearth of Britannia, which Edward runs, as well as an origin patch. But this is the coolest thing. It's a cloth map for Britannia, which isn't all that different from what came in the box with Ultima games, but on the back it has a map of Castleton, the little village we toured earlier, so that's pretty cool. But the best gift was when he showed up at my house a few days later with a surprise. He had managed to rescue my drone, and since he was headed to Chicago, he was passing through my area anyway. Apparently he used a really tall ladder combined with a really long pole and managed to get the thing down. So that is certainly one less issue to deal with from this trip, but there's still this windshield that we had to get replaced. Anyway, I guess that about wraps it up for this video. In the next and final episode of this series, we'll be going back to the Dallas area and looking at all of the tech companies I missed in the first episode, including places like Mouser Electronics and the Tandy Center, Cyrix Corporation, Microsoft, AST Computer, Apple, and more, so stay tuned for that.